everybody. We'll start. People will be filing in, but welcome to this session that's called an AI copyright and data valuation conversation. What comes next? And my name is Peter Ciotti. I'm the chairman of Creative Media. We're a business consultancy, legal services firm, and work with clients across media, entertainment, AI, and tech, and advise them about this landscape that we're going to be talking about today, which is wild and crazy, and also try to help get both sides really working together and partnering together. So that's what we do. And I'm going to introduce everybody here. Every year, this is something like my fifth one doing this. And every year, I'm just amazed by the quality of the panels that we have. And this year is truly no exception. And intentionally, I tried to get a panel that represents all aspects across the AI media ecosystem. So we have artists, tech companies, we have lawyers, and then we have a company that bridges the gap with compensation that works for all parties across the ecosystem. So I'm going to just go one by one. We'll do short introductions so we can get right into it because there's a lot to get into. If you want to get more deeply into bios, you'll be able to look them up online. So Dave, I'll start with you.
Hey everybody, I'm Dave Davis. I'm Chief Content Officer at Protege. Protege is a company that aggregates content, audiovisual content, and other kinds of content to license to AI companies. So we do bridge the gap. My background is I worked at movie studios for a number of years.
One thing, I got to stop you.
Yes.
So you have some big news today.
No comment.
Oh, okay. I'll bring it up, but anyhow. Yes. Rebecca?
Hi, I'm Rebecca Grossman-Cohen. I work at the New York Times. I lead strategic partnerships there, which means I work with the biggest tech companies and other kind of very consequential companies to have really strong relationships, do commercial deals. Increasingly, those deals are about Gen AI and licensing Times content for Gen AI. I've spent my career in the news business on the business side of news. So I've been there at the Times for almost 12 years, and it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you. Jason?
Hi there, my name is Jason Henderson. I'm a senior attorney at the law firm JWL International. I specialize in media and IP licensing. I am so passionate about copyright that I am very excited to be talking about this topic today, and I'm so thankful that you guys would have me on. And I get to sit next to the New York Times, which is like the coolest thing ever. So thank you.
That's pretty cool. BT.
Hi, my name is BT. I am a Grammy-nominated electronic music artist and film composer and a reluctant developer. So I've been making music software for the better part of 30 years, about the same length of time I've been making music professionally. In this context, I sort of sit on both sides of the aisle in that I have a foot in development in the generative AI music space, and I'm also a music artist. So there you go. I'm excited to be here.
Great to have you. And Emmy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emmy Weiner. I've been in tech for decades. And most recently, I was with Google and Google Cloud, focusing on Gen AI and emerging tech commercialization, and with Peter. So I'm excited about sharing some of the projects that we did.
Yeah, no, it'll be really interesting to hear how Google was approaching this transformation. And so we have some stories to tell. But as I was saying, these years go by very quickly, and I'm just going to do a quick recap from last year to this year. So CES to CES. This is what's changed. These are just some of the headlines. Studios, the movie studios, major Hollywood studios, finally took that leap and they sued AI developers. And the lawsuits, the three major studios sued Midjourney, so that's pending. The first fair use decisions, and we're going to get into that. We're not going to get into the weeds about copyright law, but we'll get into kind of the high level. And the first fair use decisions came down, which, depending on which side of the equation you're on, the interpretations are significantly different. They're the first massive settlements that came down between media and tech, and so Anthropic just settled. It's not a final settlement yet. It needs to be approved by the courts. $1.5 billion settlement with book authors and that was about copyright infringement. We're going to get into that. And then something shocking at the end of the year, like it was shocking to me, was that Disney, which is the most IP protective company on the planet, agreed to invest $1 billion into OpenAI. And as part of that deal, the OpenAI's Sora gets the use of Disney characters, which is pretty fascinating. We'll talk about that. Generative video has gone mainstream. AI chatbot search, of course, is now common behavior. It wasn't really a year ago. Just by a show of hands, how many people here in the room are primarily using AI first search now? I think it's 50-50-ish. And then one final thing to kind of set the stage. I just read a McKinsey report that said that tech companies will be investing $7 trillion on infrastructure up to 2030. Now, it's not all AI, but most of it is. So it kind of begs the question of, shouldn't some of that money go to the creators and the content owners? So this panel's going to make sense of it all. And I'm going to start, Rebecca, first. If you can give me the Times perspective, the New York Times perspective on the fundamental issues that are raised when tech is using content, and New York Times content in this case, for its generative AI purposes.
Sure. I mean, I can say it pretty quickly. It should be paid for for any use of our content in these tools. Look, you just made the point that these companies are investing $7 trillion across,
according to McKinsey,
right? Across all the different kind of components that go into making these tools work, whether it's chips and compute or data centers or talent or real estate to house their talent. They're spending a lot of money to do that, and they're also using content, but are doing it in ways that we believe are sort of stealing, at least for now, because they can. In their view. Obviously, our perspective is that that's not appropriate. And content is the kind of fundamental input that makes these tools useful for all of us, for all of you to search for things on the internet. Without the content, it wouldn't be productive. So we look at it in a few ways. There are a few sort of broad components for Gen AI tools and uses of content, training, RAG, and outputs, and we think about that when we think about how we work with AI companies.
Can you explain RAG?
So I will. I'll do
Okay.
all three really quickly. Training is, basically using ours and other content creators' vast archive of data and information, proprietary data, to help the models understand what syntax is and investigative topics, and understand what it means to speak and write like a Times journalist. It's the data that really powers the foundation of their models, and once it's in their tools, it's there kind of forever. And so we believe that the value that publishers and other content creators get back should reflect how much goes into how much value they're getting out of that. RAG is real-time access to information that the Times and other creators provide. It's truth, it's fact-checked, it's quality, and they are kind of pinging the Times and other publishers regularly to get access to that data. Their users know that it's real and it's fact-checked, and the AI provider should be paying for that on an ongoing basis as well. And then there's outputs. Outputs is, the summarization of either verbatim text and content or generated summaries. The way that we think about that is, again, there's a value to that the developers are getting and their users are getting. We also want to make sure that it's not so substitutional that users don't need to go deeper and go further into the content with providers. And so we structure our deals in a way that makes sure we have the right kind of content controls to sort of prevent that. So we look at all the different use cases and want to have the right kind of relationships with developers to create the best outcomes. Of course, we take action to enforce our IP rights when we can't arrive at the right kind of terms, and we can talk about that.
We'll definitely
later.
talk about that. Thanks for laying that out. So Rebecca was talking about from the content perspective, different areas of copyright. And that's going to be, those kind of buckets are right in the center of all the ongoing litigation that you hear about. So Jason, briefly, if you can describe on the other side, and then Emmy, I'm going to ask you to get your perspective too. But Jason, just from a kind of a macro legal perspective, fair use, which is the defense that's always used to copyright infringement, basically that we can use this content for these purposes and there is no consent and compensation needed.
This is actually a wonderful topic. Okay, so very, very basically, the thing to think about is, first of all, copyright. Remember, copyright is about money. Copyright is a government-sanctioned monopoly on your product because the government wants to encourage you to make work. That's the whole point, is you get to be the only one who copies it for a period of time because what the world is interested in is in more IP, more creation. And it's one of the most wonderful inventions of mankind because it mated creativity with commerce. Fair use, as an exception, was created because, hey, public policy, we want to create more work. And so as long as you are not taking too much, you are not competing in the market by directly copying it, as long as you're not breaking that monopoly, it's actually a 4-part balancing test, but we won't get into it. As long as you are not breaking that monopoly where BT owns that work, and if you're stealing it from him, then you're violating his copyright. But fair use says the public wants to create more work. And so, periodically, when somebody copies something, they say, oh, well, we have the right to it, it's fair use. Fair use is not a get-out-of-jail-free card to steal work. It is only a tool by which you can create more work that is actually justifiably yours. And so we can get into that. But that's the way to think about it. Always think, what are we actually trying to do? We're trying to make sure that work gets paid for such that the artist has a reason to keep being an artist and not quit being an artist and make more work.
Yeah, I mean, essentially in a lawsuit that you have the copyright infringement, and then it's a defense to copyright infringement that it's fair use, and that's kind of the state of play. So Emmy, who works at Google, what's your perspective from big tech? How would you say this issue, this central issue, manifested itself in day-to-day business?
For us, I mean, we had, and just to clarify, I worked at Google. I'm an ex-Googler now, but I think from technology perspective, it's changed so much faster than ever before. So we are responsible to launch as many as products possible. When it comes to content that consistently changing in an LLM world, then I think we're going to have to treat it very differently and very carefully. And that's why some companies have advanced more aggressive approach versus some are slower and a more responsible approach. And so it's up to companies. Google is more responsible companies. So we take a very careful approach, and that also pros and cons of being slow. But we have to be very fast in the market as well. I think that's something I had to consider.
Yeah, and I'll want to get into the specific example so that people see how you approach that in this one particular project. But beforehand, so BT, as an artist who's also a technologist, you have a foot in each camp. And it doesn't have to be one or the other. So sometimes these conversations seem that way. But how do you feel about it, just from an artist perspective, and speak not just for yourself, but your friends, about what's going on there, generative AI, how it's being used?
I think, like many other people, I oscillate wildly between awe and horror. And it depends on the hour, not even really the day. I think that, I mean, the conversations around generative systems, insofar as in the music domain, were ontological for a long period of time. And it was kind of like this Black Mirror conversation. I would be talking to my peers years ago and saying, like, this is coming. You're going to be able to type a sentence and make a piece of music. And I think that that people thought that wasn't a real impending technology. It was like on the foreseeable horizon, and we find ourselves in a really interesting place. Speaking from the perspective of someone who is in awe and thinks that there's awesome things here, I think really the fundamental thing about all of these technologies, whether they're LLMs, they're generative visual systems, they're generative music systems, is the part of me that's an artist really needs to kind of foundationally point at how the sort of first principles, substrate levels of these models were trained. And because there was this legal gray area, a lot of these developers, willfully speed ran development of these technologies in a way that dramatically infringes on artist rights. And so it's something I can't overlook. I just can't not be seen, to use a double negative. That being said, these systems are remarkable. And so I think we find ourselves in a very unusual and interesting landscape where we need to kind of back propagate, make a legal framework, for compensation for artists' intellectual property rights. So it's a wild place for artists to find themselves in, especially acknowledging that 45% of what would consider themselves to be professional artists in the music domain refuse to even acknowledge or experiment with these tools. Yeah. So they're going to have a lot of catching up to do when there's a moment of capitulation. That will happen. And so I can really see this and argue it from both perspectives. And I meant what I said. I have like a feeling of vacillating awe and horror, depending on what it is we're talking about. But at this kind of first principles level, I think we just really need to have conversations about fair compensation for artists.
Yeah, it's kind of like the evolution of streaming, and when YouTube came onto the scene back in like 2005, where there was YouTube grew, prior to being purchased by Google. It grew on the backs of copyright holders, from videos and all the users uploading without any kind of consent compensation to the content creators. And it was only after Hollywood sued YouTube and Google had bought YouTube that there ultimately became a content ID system. So these things have a tendency to, there's going to be this Silicon Valley move fast, break things, and then the media companies, understandably, and the artists kind of have to catch up and do the best they can in that kind of environment. And we see that happening, but the settlements are happening. So litigation is forcing settlements. Anthropic settled. Suno, which is one of the music generators,
yep.
Udio settled.
It's pending with some of the different label groups.
Yeah.
But I mean, an interesting data point about Suno is, they've spent God knows how much money in compute training these models. They've spent $3,000 on intellectual property rights. So they spent $3,000, and they have a multi-billion-dollar valuation now.
Oh yeah.
So there's catching up that has to happen, right? And it's interesting you say move fast and break things. I said when we were at the Capitol, I said move fast and breaking things in this context is moving fast and breaking artists. Oh yeah. And so it's really exciting. These tools are really wildly exciting, especially in the creative domain. Some of the things that they unlock are remarkable. I have an overall positive outlook on where we're going to land with these things, but we are in this wild Wild West space right now where we really need to figure out, fair compensation models for remunerating everyone from the New York Times to, intellectual property rights holders. There are artists, musicians, visual artists, the lot.
Yeah, look, the value, because the topic here is the value of content, which tech companies call data. And my first word of advice to tech companies is always not to use the term data. But Rebecca was saying with the New York Times, you can get your news through AI news sources, but you don't have verified sources. You don't have the in-depth report. You don't have any of that. And similarly, when it comes to music, yes, it's very easy to get music that sounds decent, but if you want to support your artist, all that kind of thing. So like this is, and then we get into what you do, and I think that'd be interesting as a bridge to, you're directly in the heart of bridging that gap. And so tell us a little bit about just what the approach is, and then, do you mind if I say the news? It's public.
Yeah, so I'm not.
It's public, so
I'm not
gonna
the
say
person
it.
who talks about it, but
So
you can talk about it.
It's a pretty big deal. So A16Z, which is the venture fund, I think it's an early stage venture fund of Andreessen Horowitz, which, this is my editorial on it, not Dave's, which is not necessarily the most IP artist friendly from the creative community standpoint. Just invested, it was just announced today, into Protégé, which is interesting because Protégé is bridging the gap. So.
Yeah, so I'll let other people talk about that. But
But
we
just
are
about
yeah.
like kind of the approach to how you're going about it.
So we've been one way or the other. We've been working with a predecessor company and then through Protégé at aggregating audiovisual content to license to AI companies on a licensed basis. And we work, by the way, with a lot of AI companies who are not really well known for talking a lot about needing to license copyrighted works, but they do, and the momentum seems really clear. A few data points. We now work with well over 100 media companies around the world. We did in 2024, our media revenue was 0. In 2025, our media revenue was 8 figures. So that's a pretty nice slope. And of course, we have high hopes for where that continues to go. We work with content owners typically on a rev share basis, and then we work with the AI companies with a couple of different primary models. The most common model is AI companies will come to us and say, we just need a lot of stuff. We need a lot of training data. We need 50,000 hours of movies or sports or whatever it is. And typically we'll license that to them on a price per minute basis. And there's a few gradations of what the quality of the content is, and maybe the genre will impact that price. But that's typically priced on a price per minute. Our other primary model is as models move into more of a fine-tuning phase from a pre-training phase, they need stuff that is much more curated. So for that, we can, using AI tools, we can search our whole catalog and we can curate really specific things. So if somebody says, I don't need 50,000 hours of movies, I just need 10,000 shots of a man crying or a horse walking across a meadow, we can go scan our whole catalog, which is hundreds of thousands of hours, and go find 10,000 shots of whatever they need.
Let me ask you a question about that, just a practical one. Do you believe that the demand for that type of specificity, or maybe more general content buckets for the use for AI purposes, do you see that is going to have longevity to it?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is clearly the path is going from simple to complex. So last year, most of our deals were just about licensing, 10,000 hours here, 50,000 hours there. Increasingly, people want multimodal data sets. So they might want movies plus captions. They might want dubbed files alongside the movie. And then they want this specificity, this curated content. So we think that's going to continue, that it's going to get more and more specific, more and more candidly challenging to sort of pull it together. That's, complexity is good for us.
How about pricing?
I mean, it'll be what the market bears. I think.
Is there can you give some kind of sense to the audience about just what pricing is for video these days?
Yeah, so broadly speaking, and again, it depends on a lot of factors, including most notably sort of the quality of the content. But you're looking at pricing around $1 to $2 per minute for different kinds of pricing for training. When you get into these curated shots, it goes up dramatically from that. And when you get into multimodality, it goes up quite a bit. But that gives kind of a sense. I'll say also, the pricing over the last 18 months, this is a business that really didn't exist 18 months ago. So 18 months ago, it was total chaos. Then there were a few companies with giant catalogs who were like, oh my God, there's an opportunity. I've got 1 million hours on a server somewhere. Maybe I can go get $1 million for that. And they'd go license it at a terribly low price. That is sort of running its course. So now you're getting back to a more stable marketplace. But it's still a little chaotic. It's still pretty early.
And then Rebecca, I'm going to ask you too, but Emmy, tell the audience about the project that you were working on and how Google was approaching that from a business model perspective.
Sure. We had a couple of employees with this idea, and exactly for that reason, because we believe that users want to access to a special content that is specific content and special content that you cannot get from any other vendors providing LLMs. So we came up with the ideas and we did market research. I would say over 90% of responders said they're willing to pay for the quality contents in addition to what they're getting on the platform. So we thought about engaging media companies and testing out and see the complexity is the pricing and how to share revenue and how to and when to show a certain content. And so I think your company is solving it. But I think that is definitely a demand, and that's how we're working together. I think it worked out really well in a way that we validated the market needs. Yeah. And I think it's just a matter of how technology companies should solve some of the complex challenges as a company and set the governance and revenue share policy and what kind of content we're going to curate.
Yeah, it was really interesting because Emmy came to me, and you can kind of gather from the way I talk about things what my perspective is, which is very much that AI is here. I'm not anti-tech. I've run tech companies, but it's about fair compensation and consent for the creators. That's my whole thing. And so I was gratified to see, and I wouldn't have done it, I wouldn't have worked with Google unless this were the case, that the goal of this initiative was actually to seek out media companies and publishers, actually strike deals that were, made sense for both of them, and then share an ongoing value as content is used, which I think is an interesting model. So that was an example of how big tech was starting to come and bring in the creators. Now, Rebecca, New York Times is interesting because you have that, probably the single most important litigation ongoing right now against OpenAI and Microsoft. But at the same time, you have the license, you've entered into a massive deal with Amazon. So help everybody understand that.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the Times is just as excited about AI and all the uses for it as the next company and next person. So it's not at all about rejecting the technology or not wanting it to exist. Similarly, I mean, if you read our complaint, you will have seen that we were in negotiations with these companies because we believe that there is a market for this kind of content and these kinds of uses, and we're really kind of open to the idea of engaging if we can do it in the right way and if they meet our principles, and we have a few of them which I can talk about. So the suit we have against OpenAI and Microsoft and now Perplexity as well is not dramatically different from why we ended up entering a deal with Amazon. We see them as two sides of the same coin. It's really about IP protection, IP enforcement, and getting the right kind of compensation, kind of in either direction. We couldn't arrive at the right kind of terms with OpenAI and Microsoft, and we could with Amazon. And so you kind of see both of those things working out in a slightly different but similar vein.
And on that deal, and we've talked about it before, that covered, you had mentioned at the beginning of this panel, the different aspects of copyright. And
yeah, that's right. It was the full scope of uses. And that's one of our principles for when and how we'll engage with tech companies. The three of them are: first, fair value exchange, which very simply is the sufficient value for all we're providing to their tools and systems. The second is about the full scope of uses and making sure that if they're going to if they've trained on our content, they're paying for training. And if they're going to continue getting that value, they'll continue paying for it. Same with RAG, as I described earlier, and outputs. And then the third is a sustainable model. So it's not a kind of get out of jail card or one and done, but these are models that we can count on and really make sure that they're establishing the right precedent long term. So those are the three kind of high level principles. They're actually pretty consistent with how we've worked with tech companies for a long time, just translated for a generative AI era.
And the economics were?
Similarly, I will not comment.
I
will
had
not
to
comment.
ask.
I appreciate your
I had to
inquiry.
ask.
But no.
Curiosity.
But remember that the
It
other
is a good
side,
deal.
Yeah, I know.
whatever the deal is that you're paying for, remember that the downside of actually getting caught and losing in a copyright infringement case are profound. I mean, this is something that Dave talks about off the top of his head. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I mean, just you look at you look at the Cadre versus Meta case, and you look at the Anthropic case, and first of all, everybody thinks Cadre versus Meta was bad for copyright owners, and Anthropic
I
was
don't.
good for
I think it was
copyright
great.
owners.
I don't
but it's
either.
not
Read the opinion.
The Meta case is actually really good for copyright. The Anthropic result is a big headline grabber, and the reason why would Anthropic settle for $1.5 billion is because they were facing statutory damages of $150,000 per book infringed times 1 million books or something like that, or 7 million books, which is like $1 trillion. So yeah.
No, I mean, I was going to just further your point. The decision said that it's fair use in a really narrow sense. It's not fair use in that, first of all, they stole the books, right? And so any kind of thieving, stealing is not.
And they would have
legal.
lost on that. The judge came out against them and said, this is piracy.
Exactly.
Straight up piracy.
And then second, they didn't really have the evidence of outputs, which is a question to your points about the 4 kind of questions of fair use. One of them is about substitution. And the judge said outright, kind of nodding, I think, to news cases out there, that had substitution been considered and had they been able to make that kind of judgment, it would also not have gone in their favor. And so we agree, Dave, that it's a pretty good
But let's put that all in perspective again. As I mentioned at the beginning, $7 trillion will be spent up to just by 2030, just in a couple of years, on AI infrastructure. So that gives some perspective about a $1.5 billion settlement is massive, but that is a drop in the bucket. Nonetheless, at least the pressure is getting there where now there's an understanding that something needs to be worked out. So BT.
I have just an interesting kind of zoomed out perspective on this conversation. It's a great conversation. We're having a very kind of time band delimited conversation right now.
Yeah.
So we're talking about like this very specific moment in time, right? Where there are going to be winners and losers in the intellectual property rights domain. There are going to be fair deals. There are going to be unfair deals. But we're standing at the edge of all of these substrate models being trained. I thought it was really interesting what you were talking about fine tuning. So when that happens, we're going to be recursively training all these models. So we'll be training them on their own outputs, and that obfuscates the work. So there's this golden hour moment where intellectual property rights matter. And this is something I'm screaming to musicians right now. Your data set has tremendous value. Like, align yourself with a great group of people that's trying to do fair deals with generative music services. Because when we get done training all of these first models, everything is obfuscated. They're going to train on their own outputs, and it can't be tracked. And just another thing about this time period that's interesting is baked into the very foundation of these models is that they won't overfit. So it's this very clever way of not making output that is directly ingested into its input. So making things that are not of substantial similarity. And so we'll be training on the outputs of these models themselves in this very, very next stage of things. So it's very important that this conversation is happening right now.
And the pressure from this panel on the creative side is very important right now because, like any industry, like when Ted Cohen started on the music streaming side when we were negotiating that deal, it's not like economics came from the heavens. that there were people in a room who were putting pressure on each other, and then magically those became the economics for the industry for decades to come. So that's happening now. We have a couple minutes, and then we'll get to the question. We have to go rapid fire, but let's go one by one. Just an interesting use of generative AI that you want to flag for people out there. Emmy, I'll start with you.
Related to content?
Yeah.
I would like to see all the upcoming startups companies helping creators to be funded more and start innovating more and partner with bigger enterprise companies to capture that moment that you're talking about. I think that there's a technology there, but it's not discoverable as of today. And if we have found a way to share the technology and the tools for creators, and then share the great content and the revenue share as well, then I think we can find a great business model this year.
And BT, how about you?
I'm tremendously excited. The creative part of me is tremendously excited about the sort of world we find ourselves in right now. I think that, I mean, I've stated clearly kind of my thesis friction point, which is like we need to pay artists. And that being said, figuring that part out, I think that the creative unlock and the potential of some of these tools is so mind-bendingly exciting, and it democratizes creation in a very, very powerful way where the skill acquisition and like the 10,000 hour rule is going to go out the window. We're going to see 14-year-old kids making films that are nominated for an Oscar as a solo shop, in the next couple years. I want to live in that world. Like, I think that many more people have things to say creatively than have the ability to say them. And so I love the idea of the democratization of these tools, the friction points that they diminish in the creative process, the unimaginable new techniques, styles, idioms of music that will come up because of it. Again, speaking of my own personal domain, but across the creative, spectrum. And so, I just think that we really need to have real, honest conversations about how these things are built. What's powering their building. I love hearing what you're doing. I think the more that we have that conversation, honestly, and that there's a fair remuneration and disclosure as to what's being used in the training of these models, everybody wins. It's a really exciting time for creators, I think.
And Jason, Rebecca and Dave, just very quickly, something to flag for everybody to check out.
I'm actually extremely excited about generative AI being used on the back end to enable discovery of content that exists that people don't know about. Because there are so many pieces of work, some in the public domain, some licensed but just unknown, that are deep in there but can connect with you. But generative AI can contribute to search and discovery in very exciting ways. So I'm very excited about it. It's less sexy, but it's really cool because it's going to connect you with what you're looking for.
Rebecca?
The New York Times newsroom is doing a lot with AI tools to help investigative journalism. And so after Charlie Kirk was killed, the team did a piece that analyzed, I think, 2,500 podcasts, articles, videos to assess or to analyze his debate style and see how and why he appealed to the kids that he appealed to, and did a really deep dive on it and produced a really interesting investigative piece. We did a similar thing a year prior to that on Tucker Carlson, and it took a year, where the Charlie Kirk work took about 2 weeks, and it was because of the tools that our AI initiatives unit, couldn't think of the name, the tools that they were using. So there's a lot of stuff that the Times newsroom is doing around that kind of work.
Very cool. And Dave?
So I think there's a great debate over whether AI is going to, take more jobs than it creates. One area, and I don't know the answer to that, and I see all kinds of places to be scared, and I've got college-age kids, and we debate that. But one thing that I think is really exciting, a friend of mine is in advertising, and he's really excited about AI. He said, he just did a advertising campaign for a Mexican microbrewery that's coming to the U.S. It's a professional campaign with professional copywriters and really high quality, but produced substantially with AI. This microbrew spent a couple $100,000 on it, which they could afford to do. But they look like they're playing in the same game that like Heineken plays in and that Budweiser plays in. So there is a huge unlock for all of these smaller and mid-sized companies to be able to do some things. And that, by the way, unlocks jobs for copywriters and for a lot of people
And for
involved in the
creatives,
process.
because you
And for
still need the
creators.
creative at the top guiding things. I want to point out one thing, super fandom, and we're out of time, but if anybody has questions, feel free to stop if the panel has time to hang out a little bit. But super fandom, so like what Disney did on their $1 billion investment with OpenAI and the ability to now, let's say, put Mickey and Darth Vader in the hands of super fans, and then they can create their own content with it. First of all, that's outstanding marketing. That was what Disney essentially did with the movie Frozen, and that's why Frozen was so successful, because it was the first time that Disney told their lawyers to say, like, hands off on kids creating content using songs of Frozen, and Frozen became the most successful animated movie of all time. So I think super fandom, which is available not just to Disney, but to athletes, to celebrities, to any major brand, that's interesting because it's the company or celebrity can create the rules, set the rules of how that content is used, and then there can be a micropayment triggered every time it is. So I think that's interesting. But in any event, I know there's a lot, and several of you have questions, so we'll be here for those who can stay. But thanks for coming, and panel, thank you very much for being part of this.
Thank you very much.